Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you are. Just give a few moments for more people to join. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today. Hello and welcome to those of you coming in. Wonderful. Okay, it seems like folks will be continuing to come in. Just give just a few more seconds for folks to join, but then we can get started with today's session. So now that everybody's settling in nicely, hello everyone. Welcome to our fourth Mobilizing Justice Community of Practice workshop this year, and thank you all so much for joining today's discussion. My name is Sophie Callahan, and I work for Climate Action Partnership, and I manage our Center for Active Transportation Initiative, and I'm excited to be moderating today's session. Every time I host one of these workshops, it's a real pleasure to see so many returning and new faces log on to the call. And for anyone whose first time it is, I'd like to extend a warm welcome to this community. These workshops are designed as opportunities to share knowledge and explore strategies to reduce transport poverty and increase modal choice across Canada. And in today's session, I'm very excited to be joined by Professor Catherine Morency from Polytechnique de Montréal, and she is the academic lead for the Mobilizing Justice National Survey on Transport Poverty. This national survey has been conducted with the goal of better understanding the root causes of transport poverty, laying the groundwork for Canada's first transportation equity standards, and a standardized community-driven planning process to help planners, policymakers, and advocates set measurable and enforceable transportation equity goals. Catherine will be speaking about the process of developing the transport survey, what MJ's survey's findings have revealed about transport poverty in Canada, and how we can leverage these learnings to shape more just, evidence-based transportation systems in our country. Before we dive in, though, I'll just take some time to go through a few introductory matters. I'm just going to let some more folks in from the waiting room as well, before we move on to our land acknowledgement for today. So while we're meeting virtually, TCAT acknowledges that the land that we operate on is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. These sacred lands are covered by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement forged between the Anishinaabe Nation and the Haudenosaunee Confederacy to peacefully share resources. At TCAT, we recognize that many Indigenous peoples are particularly vulnerable to climate change and will be faster and disproportionately impacted by its effects. Through our work, we're committed to disrupting ongoing approaches to governance that reproduce settler-colonial relations and systematically exclude Indigenous peoples from policymaking. As I mentioned, I represent the Center for Active Transportation Initiative at Climate Action Partnership, which is a nonprofit based in Toronto, and the organization that hosts these convenings. We're also joined by several folks from the Mobilizing Justice partners and researchers. Beyond Catherine, I think I spotted Jasmine in the mix, for example, and many others. So TCAT exists to build safer, healthier, and more equitable places, and we do that by working with and supporting communities and creating safer streets for walking and riding bikes. So just a quick agenda today, so that we all know where we're headed. We're starting things off with the rest of this introduction, including to the Mobilizing Justice Project in a moment, as well as a short icebreaker, everyone's favorite. From there, I will look forward to handing the floor over to Catherine for her presentation, which will take about 30 minutes, and that will be followed by ample time for Q&A, since Catherine is our only speaker today. Just to give everyone a little bit of background on these sessions, I'll touch on what the Mobilizing Justice community of practice is, and we convene these webinars as part of the Mobilizing Justice Initiative, which is a 5-year project and intersectoral partnership between 33 academics, 14 government agencies, 7 transportation companies, and 7 nonprofits, including ours. This coalition exists to better understand and recognize transportation inequities in and across Canada. And we're defined by 3 main objectives. The first being to document the causes, effects, and responses to transportation inequities, to evaluate equitable standards and practices for practitioners seeking to increase transportation equity, and then to evaluate pilot projects and initiatives being implemented across the country which seek to improve access to transportation for marginalized communities. Before moving on to our icebreaker, I just wanted to touch on what exactly we mean by transport or mobility equity. We could devote an entire year of sessions to simply defining this concept, but we like Jay Pitter's definition, who has worked on the Mobilizing Justice Project as a framework for rounding these conversations. Mobility equity strives to ensure that everyone, regardless of race, class, or any other social identity, is able to access safety, joy, and prosperity with dignity while journeying. It's not simply about moving people from point A to point B. Mobility equity is freedom. So that's from Jay Pitter. So we'll be starting off our session with a short poll to get a sense of where you're all coming from, the type of work that you do. To join, I'm going to be putting the link in the chat just momentarily, and you can feel free otherwise to scan the QR code that's on the screen, or simply go to menti.com and you can enter the code on the top of the slide, which is 7226-3558. So I'm just going to take a moment to pop that in the chat as well. Just a moment while I'm sharing my screen, a little bit of hopping around. So here is the link to the Menti poll as well in the chat. And yeah, thank you, Jasmine, for putting in the join code as well. So you can just go to menti.com and enter in 7226-3558. So while you all take a moment to join with those instructions, I'm just going to be switching over my screen share so that we can all follow along in the poll together. So just a moment. See, we've already got folks eager and about. I'm just waiting for my screen to load. Here we go. Okay. And then here we can all follow along. Just a second. I need to be able to see this on my own screen. All right. So we wanted to know which part of the country you're all based in. I see a lot of people joining from Ontario today. I am hopeful that the time change hasn't affected, or confused folks joining from other places especially, but yeah, also see a bit from British Columbia and Quebec. Someone joining from Nova Scotia, welcome. Thanks for joining. All right, I'll move on to our next question. Sorry, folks, I'm having some sort of responsivity issues on my side that I don't typically encounter. There we go. All right, so next we would like to know what mode of transportation you work on. So do you work in pedestrian matters? Do you work on cycling, public transit, car share, active transportation generally, sustainable mobility generally, or something else? All right, so quite a few folks on public transit today. That's great to hear. I think, yeah, my understanding is that the survey results will be interesting for all sorts of folks. But yeah, I could see that interest. Quite a few cycling folks, quite a few AT general folks. That's great. Several other. That's wonderful too. We love interdisciplinarity. Great. All right. So a big showing from public transit this session. That's great. So I'm going to go on to our next slide. We'd like to know what type of built environment you work in, if any specifically. So do we have our urban folks here, people who work more in suburban contexts, combinations of urban, suburban, rural? We have people who take a holistic perspective, I see, with all types of built environment forms, combinations, lots of folks urban and suburban. All right. Yeah, so I see we have a lot of people who work in all forms today. And then we'd just like you to briefly type in what type of organization you're representing. Are you from the advocacy world? Are you a community programmer? See people joining from our Mobilizing Justice Initiative, more MJ partners, municipality, fabulous. Love to share more widely, but also great to have folks from all sorts of sectors here. A lot of people in advocacy, that's great. I think this will, yeah, this is a very relevant session for you. Newcomer services, an app maker. All right, got some software folks. Consultant, construction. Wow, we've really got a mix of voices in the room today. That's fabulous. I'm really glad to see that. Advocacy, other university, affiliation, national charity. Yeah, so got some NGO representation. Yeah, wonderful. And yeah, public transit agency. Great to see such a mix. And then we just want to know, have you attended a previous Mobilizing Justice Community of Practice session before? All right, so lots of familiar faces, but lots of new faces as well. We always love to see that. Welcoming folks back, but also bringing in new voices. Okay. And then I'm sure at least some of you in this virtual room have had certain historical sporting events fresh on your minds lately. I'm wondering if you could pick one of these sports to watch, even, whether you were following along with the World Series or otherwise, just if it's the season, which sport you're turning into. So if you're sticking with baseball, softball, despite it all, basketball, got some Raptors fans maybe, tennis, soccer, football. All right, I can tell that we're a Canadian audience. Lots of you have picked something on ice. And if you're maybe a little bit more into my camp, wondering whether things like competitive puzzling counts. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I really recommend that you do some YouTubing. It's competitive puzzling is very impressive. Um, and a lot of you holding a little bit of resentment towards me for posing the question. Maybe the wounds are a little bit too fresh and you need a little bit more recovery time. All right. Well, yeah, I see. Wow, a lot of you are feeling like you need a little bit more of a cool down. But I see. Perhaps I should have known better than to include something like puzzling as an option in this group. But yeah, all right, folks all across the board. So that was our last warm-up question. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm very pleased to now be handing things over to you, Catherine.
Okay, so I'm gonna share my screen and then let's move with this. So thank you very much for inviting MJ to present some of the, results. I have to admit that so as you will see, the main topic is about the national survey. And as you will see, there's much more we can do with the data. So the data are out and you will have the opportunity to see, probably understand what are the various things we can do with this kind of data. So first thing I want to say is that, you've recalled what is the MJ initiative. I have to mention So I'm talking about the national survey, but other people are highly involved in the survey as well as managing this wide project, namely Stephen Farber and its team. So I took various elements for this presentation from various places. So I took extract from Stephen Farber's presentation he made at TAC. I took content from the MJ website that I'll probably be showing after also for some part. I took elements from a data paper we're working on, as well as something we presented regarding the survey methods at the ISCTSC conference previously this year. So it's an aggregation of things. So three things I'm going to show, of course, process of developing a transport survey. So for transport justice, I should say, because that was a long and complex process. So that's more the part I'm aware of, because there's a lot of things we had to do to come up with this first version of the national survey. And then, of course, few findings, but most of the findings will be extracted from the data that we just published. So a lot of people are looking into the data and trying to mix them with other types of data set and developing a methodology to understand the various components that were included in the survey. So I will not have that many, findings regarding poverty in Canada. I made, though, have recommendations with respect when people do surveys, maybe some questions that could be added. So I'll be showing also some next steps regarding this. So I have to acknowledge also that my team at Polytechnic worked a lot to do the programming and the implementation of the questionnaire. So that's something I wanted to acknowledge. I'm not a programmer. I'm lucky I have plenty of them in my team. I have 5 of them who are engaged in the development of open source tools. And what you will see, so what we use for the MJ National Survey on Transport Justice was based on an open source software we're developing in Polytechnic. So I guess the most important question, since we all know that there's a lot of surveys everywhere, and when you launch a new survey, you have the risk of fatigue among respondents. And we know that across the world, there are issues with respect to response rates. So there are too many surveys being distributed. It's harder to recruit people. It's harder to keep them engaged. So of course, before you launch a survey, you have to question yourself whether it's necessary or not, or if you could find data elsewhere. So the reason we decided to go with a new survey is because what we're looking for is not typically included in travel surveys. So there are various travel surveys across Canada. We'll be having a new one, a new travel survey to cover the entire Canada. Of course, that's not a simple task neither. So usually what we have with these survey is observed behavior. And that's really important, because if we have observed behavior and we use this to plan transportation networks, well, we're actually recreating networks that people for current trips. We're not addressing these limitations, the barriers, and the more or less the suppressed trips, so which could be called latent demand. So there's an issue when we only rely on observed behavior. And in addition to this, we have no clue about the quality or the perception of the context in which these behaviors happen. And that's unfortunate, because when you try to build transportation network or implement infrastructure, you're hoping that it will increase the quality of life of all population segments. And well, we have the risk of not being able to understand what is necessary. So we may use description of data, use accessibility measures, use all of these tools, but we will still not have the perception. So there's nothing regarding these elements, barriers, constraints faced by people in their daily travels, in their daily activities. We sometimes use the word mismatch between what people do, what they would like to do. So this gap is really a problem. And we have to ask people, because if we don't ask them, we won't know what were their expectations and satisfaction level. So there's a lot of concepts we can use to try to describe this concept of mismatch between what we observe and what people would like to do. So the idea is really about understanding these components that we don't capture using typical survey, and that we don't capture using any operational data that we can have. And I use plenty of these data. but gathering elements which reflect this perception is another question. So this is really something that we need to capture. So that's the basis why we decided to launch a survey, because launching a survey is costly. It requires development. And in this case, it was even more challenging because of the type of question we were trying to capture. So I'll be presenting the process that we use to make sure that we could have both the relevant questionnaire as well as the good tool to have interactions with potential respondents. I'm not saying there's no limitation. There are plenty. We can discuss this as well. So the survey process, there were more or less 4 steps. The first step was really to try to understand what we're trying to capture. So there was a workshop in 2021 when we had people doing brainstorming around key topics, namely mobility aspirations, barriers and constraints, social, economic, and well-being impacts, suppressed travel, excess travel. So these are all elements for which we do not have currently data. And the idea was really to try to understand the key topics to address in a questionnaire. So that was like the big brainstorming where we had a huge list of things that we wanted to measure. And if you're interested, there's a paper where we actually summarize what happened during this workshop. So we had a lot of inputs, I think something like 1,000 inputs regarding elements, questions, and perspective regarding all these elements. And then the second step, it's not necessarily in sequential order, because I recall having more than one interaction with the seat. So the seat is the Community Equity Advisory Table. And the idea was to ask them what they felt about some of the questions we were thinking of including in the questionnaire. And the seat is really composed of leaders, so community leaders. I put the definition that you can find on the website. So they are all people who are much more aware of elements to account and vulnerabilities. And they are much better than us in being able to assess, how to ask questions, which question to ask or not, the kind of answers we should include, and the way we need to formulate things. So the framing of the questions, all these elements, we may feel as a researcher that we are aware. So theoretically, we can maybe be aware, but it's not the same thing as having a real life experience. So we had feedback on these important elements and questions to include in the national survey questionnaire. That was really rich. That was, how can I say, it was curious interactions at some point where we had to think about how we would manage to be careful enough in the way we include questions or not. And we had this pilot testing, so they tried questionnaires, and then we really had very, very useful feedback to make sure that we would get answers, and we would get relevant answers to those elements we wanted to measure. So, and then of course we had the interactions with the leadership. So the way the MJ project is organized, it's a big project. A lot of people are involved, and so I was part of this national survey design team. So we had to make sure that we deliver questionnaire embedded in a tool so that we can launch a survey and gather data. And of course, these data are to be used by, namely, the rest of the Mobilizing Justice team, and to make sure that they can also be relevant for other people who want to use them. So we had a lot of interactions to try to understand what were the expectations of the team with respect to what needed to be gathered. And of course, at the same time, as a survey design researcher, we need to make sure that we don't generate a survey which will take 1 hour to fill, and then for which we'll have very low response rate, and that will actually not get us anywhere. So there was an exhaustive set of questions, and this big file where we put all the questions we could think about, covering all the topics that were discussed before at the workshops and with the seat. And then we asked everyone to rank and identify, was it relevant? Do they think it should or not be included in the survey? To what the level it would provide the required information they wanted to use the survey for? And of course, the idea was to maximize the usability of the survey, make sure we measure what we want to capture, make sure we're able to answer key questions that we want the MJ projects to lead to, and of course, to make sure that we can still administer reasonable surveys. And then we designed the pilot survey. So when I teach transportation in my class, there's a part where you actually need to test. So this is the pilot survey. And we're lucky in Polytechnique because we've been doing travel surveys since 2010 with the platform that has been evolving since then. And we have a list of, so we have an internal panel, which is not representative of any population precisely, but these are people who allowed us to recontact them. So we actually did a pilot in which we use a part of this panel, and we asked them to help us design the first national survey. So that was really what we were asking them to do. We said, we need your help in designing the first national survey on transport justice. And we, at the time, designed 4 scenarios. So it's not like A/B testing but it's scenario testing. So 4 different questionnaires. So as you see in the bottom of the screen, we add similar components. So it was the descriptive and factual elements were the same in all the scenarios. So we were asking about home location, dwelling feature, car ownership, the features of all members, mobility tools. So do you have a transit pass, bike sharing, cars, things like this. And we were also asking few details regarding the key destinations. And then we were entering, which was randomly assigned to the respondent, one of these 4 scenarios. And the idea was really to test various types of questions with specific elements at the core. So barriers and constraints, or the well-being outcomes, or satisfaction and gaps. So we really tested combinations of questions to try to see what could come out of such information, of such a way to ask questions. And we also include, as we do in most of the surveys we do, burden questions at the end. So perceived complexity, perceived duration of the questionnaire. Do people at one point thought about dropping out? So things to help us understand the quality of the interface itself, the burden level of the question, and the way we ask them. So that's really it was a big step for us to actually launch sets of questions to try to understand what was happening. So the difference was really in the between. And then we had 800 respondents. So we used part of our panel. I think we have something like 35,000 email addresses. So we launched this, and 800 people did the survey, completed the survey. And then we looked into response behaviors. And this is my background, in the sense that we do a lot of survey design. So our goal, so the mandate we had as A1 team, was to design this survey and administer. So this is the kind of process we go through to try to make sure we do a good survey. So here we have 2 things. So we looked into the sequence of questions and tried to understand at what point people were dropping out, to see which were the most, so the triggering questions. And it's not only about duration, it's a duration, but it's also complexity of questions, or the way it can challenge people, and challenge in various ways. So we have these 4 scenarios. As you see, the completion rate is really different. Completion rate is the proportion of people who started the question that actually finished it. And we have a panel, so they want to help us. So even with this, we still have, we don't have 100% completion. And then you have the duration. So completion and duration are related, but not totally. So this is using these, the examination of where people were dropping out, as well as their estimation of the complexity of the questionnaire we proposed, that we ended up with a final survey. So this is something, and I don't know if in the room people design surveys, but we started to add these kind of questions in all surveys we're allowed to do so. So for our own survey, we do include these questions when we have mandate for regional surveys. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but it's really useful to understand the perception. So here we ask 4 questions at the end of the questionnaire, and it was the assessment of the burden level. So this is on a scale of 0 to 100. So we were trying to compare the burden level, perceived burden level of those who finished, of course. There's a bias because those who drop out, we don't have their answers. We also have the evaluation of the complexity level. So you see here that we have difference with respect to the questions we were asking. Some were more complex. And we also ask whether the questionnaire was too short or too long. So too long would be 100, too short would be 0. So we're trying to get 50 or so. So for some, it was mostly considered too long. And also the interest level, because sometimes if it's more interesting, people will be willing to spend more time to answer the question. And most often you rely on the quality of your interface to reduce the perceived duration. So for many of our questionnaire, people think they spend more time filling the questionnaire than they actually did. So it's helping us. When you have a good interface, it's actually helping people to reduce the burden. It's like perceived time when you travel. If you can wait or travel in good condition, then the perceived time will be reduced. So we move and then we decided on the final sets of questions. So more or less here, and it was stolen from the paper, the data paper that's been developed currently. So actually there was another decision that we made. So there was a lot of discussion on what needs to be included in the I say the final, but for myself, I don't think it's the final. I think it's the first wave of the national survey. I think we need to administer more often this kind of question. So for the first wave that was administered, these are the questions that were kept, but we also included new questions. So after discussing about what were the expected outcome of the national survey, of course, one of the things we want to know is to be able to assess the level of transport poverty. So we used and I forget to mention, but when we were developing the questionnaire and the full exhaustive set of questions, we were looking into the literature to see what was proposed, as well as what people thought we should ask. And in the perception question for this final questionnaire, we included direct question for the 4 dimension of transport poverty. I'll be coming back to this because it was proposed in the paper by Lucas and we've identified these dimensions, and then we decided to start the questionnaire. This perception section included direct questions for these dimensions. So we would be able to actually report on, how people feel with respect to these elements. I'll be showing the questions. And are we able to see differences based on various features of people? And so this was implemented, this question. The last section on respondent burden is not included in the last version. So in the national survey, you don't have this. We use this for the pilot only. And of course, this kind of questionnaire can be long because there's a lot of perception question, but there's also components of spatial location. And the difference between a consumer appreciation survey and a transport-based survey is because you have space and you have time. So you need maps. So it's more complex because you need to make sure that what is entered is actually makes sense. So the tool we use is called Evolution. It's been developed. It's been in development since 2010. It's been used in quite a lot of surveys, a lot for regional large-scale household travel surveys in Montreal, namely the Montreal 2023, the Quebec 2023 survey, in other regions, the first national survey in Quebec as well. It's the same platform. So it's an open source platform. So we also are trying to make sure that it's easy to use. It's being tested multiple times. So the challenges, of course, the complexity. We also are trying to minimize burden. We can support multilingual, so as long as it's the same alphabet, can be implemented to increase the probability of people answering. We do testing for accessibility components, and there's some validation throughout the interactive validation. So the idea is really to make sure that we can increase the quality and limit the required post-processing of data. So this is our few snapshots of the survey. So it's generated. So we're currently working on the facility to make it easier to generate any survey you want to use. But you see the example. So home location, you're using a map. And then you have the identification of usual place of work and study, questions with respect to mobility tools, the perception questions, and some of the types of tool we use to capture evaluation on a Likert scale, continuous Likert scale. So if I go to the data collection that was done, so the first wave of the national survey, so we used a panel to make sure we could capture people across Canada. We had some quotas to reach for various strata, spatial strata. So we have 27,000 or so completed questionnaires across Canada. You see the distribution in the bottom, as well as the share of the answers for the various province. The first, so when we proposed the project MJ, the idea was to target low-income people and doing surveys. So developing a questionnaire and implementing is not that costly. But what is really costly is recruiting people. This is the most complex part as well, because you need to reach people and you need to convince them to participate. And if you just go on the website or go on any social media, then you'll have a skewed and biased sample. So that's a problem. So you need to make sure that you're able to target the right population. Here, for various reasons, namely the fact that it's really costly, we use the panel to do this. So panel are not representative. So you cover the area, that's okay. You're limited by the number of people which are registered to the panel. You can control for demographic, you can control for income, but it's probably not covering the entire set of people, and namely vulnerable people or the hard to reach populations. So that's probably something we need to think about for the other ways. So we covered these. Still, we had this sampling frame. So we managed to capture these 27,000 Canadians. And so these are complete questionnaires. Sorry. And then you have just a glimpse of the sample. So this is unweighted data. So this is just the sample composition. So just to give an insight. So income range, the target was to be able to have people, so household with income less than 60,000. So that's what we considered low income, and over 60,000. Of course, in the database, you have more details, so it can be reorganized other way. So you have 41% of the respondent with less than 60,000 per year as an income. You have the distribution of the age of the respondents on the bottom, as well as the combination of households based on car ownership and size. And then I forget to mention that all this sample was weighted. So we used various features to make sure that we are able to do statistical inference when we use weights. So the distributed data includes weight, so we are able to at least make some conclusions for those who are represented by the survey. So I said that in the final questionnaire, we added direct questions with respect to the 4 dimensions of transport poverty, as proposed by Lucas and Al in a paper by 2016. So what we added are questions for these dimensions. So the 4 dimensions are the mobility time dimensions, accessibility dimensions, affordability, and exposure to externalities. So I will be showing some of the results for this. So I have results which are weighted, I have results which are not weighted, but there are some difference. So you'll see, I'll tell you which one are weighted or not. So I'll be showing some of the distribution, but of course, this is just the beginning of the analysis, because the fun part for the analysis is starting. So after all this time, because it was a long process, the database is now ready, and we have multiple people looking into specific questions. So I didn't look into specific questions. I'm not looking to the raw data. We know that income is a part of the equation, but we also know that home location is the other important part of the equation. So, so for these questions, so if you look into these dimensions, so mobility dimensions, for each of these dimensions, we ask various questions. And throughout the questionnaire, there are other perception questions for which we have similar, not exactly the same, but it's a strategy to see whether there are coherence in the answers. So this is also something that we'll be looking at. So if I go into some of the distributions that we can have, so this one is weighted. So what you see on the x-axis are the values of the Likert scale. So when we use our platform, we use a continuous Likert scales that goes from 0 to 100. And if people don't answer, the value is negative. You really have to start moving the bubble on the scale to actually get a value. So that's the idea. So here you have the distribution for the less, so oh, I forgot the legend. It's not cool. So you have the low income and, well, not low income, but high income, but the less than 60,000 and the more than 60,000. And the idea is to try to compare distributions. But this is for the entire survey sample. So the 27,000 weighted by the residing population. So here was, I travel more kilometers than I would like to. So the blue are the low income and the red or orange are the high income. So I would say there's not much difference. And of course, all the statistical tests still have to be performed, but I wouldn't recommend just looking at this at the Canadian level. This is just to give you an insight on the type of data. So of course, one of the assumptions is that space, so home location is key in these kind of answers. So we'll have to look into typologies of home location. So with the transport options I have available, I can reach less or more destinations than I need. Same thing. So you have similar distribution. It's a bit skewed to the left for low income and more to the right with more than 60,000. I wouldn't call them high income. I would call them, oh yeah, the legend is on the bottom. So the over than 60, I just saw it. So, and this is like, I have fewer more cars than I would like to. Again, it's not that different, and it's really concentrated in the middle, which seems to be that there's not that many, and we're trying to look into the extreme values. And this is the safety. So one part of the externality dimension, so exposure to externalities. And you see that this is really a different component. So when you look into cars, transport options, and kilometers, the distributions are more or less centered around the mid values, which is, well, quite okay. I would say it's not too good, not too bad. But when you look into the distribution for this crime, so I feel safe or not safe from crime and harassment, this is actually quite different because you have more to the right, and you see that the high income are much more to the top. So people don't seem to be afraid because you have much less value below 50, but it's a bit different for the low income. And then this was also quite interesting when we're looking into this question, because we said, let's see how people compare themselves with others. And when we said compared to the rest of the population, I feel that my overall travel conditions are worse or better than others. That was actually quite surprising because there doesn't seem to be all the people with low income are at the left and all the other ones are at the right. I need to recall at this point that we use the panel and the only discriminating factor is income. So of course, we're not covering the entire set of vulnerable populations. And I don't think that this recruitment strategy would allow to do something else. So we really need to think about other ways to administer the survey. So the tool is one thing, the way you recruit is another thing. So this is something we'll need to think about. And then I have much more complex in the sense that there's a lot of numbers on this, on the cross analysis. So you'll see the same question. So compared to the rest of the population, I feel my overall travel conditions are worse or better than others. So what we tried to do here is to look into all other potential variable that could create a difference between these two. And this is for the entire Canada, because there are too many combinations of value that I could put on a presentation. So when you want to include all these components, you actually have to move to a model. I had this presentation made only with the Quebec data. And since I changed it to the Canadian data because I knew it was probably not only Quebec participants in the call, but at this point, the interesting thing is to dig into the spatial components. And since we only have 27,000 observation across Canada, well, it's a lot, but it's not when you try to go to a specific location. The idea will be to see if we can create typologies of locations and look into difference between types of neighborhoods. So maybe data from the proximity measures could be useful, or other elements like this. But since we will not be able to report on a specific borough of a specific city, it would be interesting to at least control for what's available in terms of mobility services and probably population density and other figures that would help. So here what you see is for the entire sample. And this question on the left, so do I feel that my travel conditions are worse or better? So what's on top, and I don't know what happened with the title, but on the top, the answer is yes, with the 51%. And these are people who answered yes to the fact that they were using paratransit. So since there are some admissibility elements, these are people with limitations. So they are among the lowest value we observe for this. So if you have a limitation, you still are not saying that they are that much worse, but they are among the lowest. Else, if you don't have access to transit, you're lower. And if you are a full-time teleworker, it's also lower, as well as elderly. So this is actually interesting. If you go to the question on the right, so I make less or more kilometers than I would like, so less would be towards the zero. So if you don't have a driving license, you travel less kilometers than you would like to. So there seems to be surplus travel here, as well as for people age 60 and more. So they're more skewed to the left. We don't have that many people traveling more than they would like, except those for part-time telework, which seems to be in agreement with the papers that say with teleworking. So with the COVID, people moved further away, and when they travel to work, they have to travel their longer distance. Well, if we go to this component of safety, I feel not at all safe or very safe in the face of road accidents. We see that, well, we have to check here, probably not many observation, but we see there's not many, it's like varying between 50 and 60, and it's not changing that much. So this, my assumption will be, we really need to go look into spatial location and features of the neighborhood, because if you live in an urban, dense area, it's probably not the same answers, and it's probably not these demographic key features or mobility tools that will change the value. The question of fewer, more transportation options that I would like, less option. So if you don't have access to transit, at least this is Koreans. If you go to, so everything here, average values are below 50. So this is also something to look at, because it means that not that many people feel that they have more options, that they have an abundance of options. So this is something to look at. And the question of spending money, you have these less money than I can afford, which is a bit the strange questions, but you have elderly people saying I could travel more. So if I don't, it's probably not because of money. And we don't have that many people then that go high above in the more. This is just the average values. So it's just to give you an insight on, and this is only based on part of these first set of questions, and there are plenty more. So of course, the national survey team, is not necessarily the first who's going to use the data, because our main task was to do the survey and make sure we can distribute a database. So other teams are working on this value, and of course we'll be doing, because it's also a fun part. But in the next steps, there's a lot of things, and I stole this from Steve. I know he's not online, but I asked him before if I could steal stuff. So there are something that the Mobilizing Justice group wants to output in terms of products. Of course, in my case, there's this data set that can be used by multiple people, and there's a lot of result. Things are available on the website as well. And this is actually, since we have all these data now, people are currently trying to look and to see how it can be made useful to support decision making. I'm advocating, I'm hoping we can do this survey. So there are two things I hope will happen. First, now that the questionnaire is available, we can adjust it, but we should administer it multiple times. And we should find ways to recruit participants using other strategies through groups as part of other surveys where it's address based with letters, and at least if it's not possible to administer the entire the questionnaire, at least include these questions on the dimensions of transport poverty at the end, so we could capture this combined with typical trip diary. That would be amazing. So we need to be able to have both components. And probably in the next month, we'll be able to identify these questions for which we get richer information on the transport justice dimensions. I think these ones we have are very interesting, but they need to be further examined. Of course, you have data. So we have all the faculty from the MG team have access to data in which we included the dissemination block. So it's not, of course, home location precisely, but if you move to the block, then you can combine with a lot of data sets. So it's really interesting. And then you can have other types of location. Spatial location is always the critical element as part of these dissemination of data. And the idea will be to make sure that it's used more often. And there's options for fusion. And I also think, as I said, we need typology so we can better understand the answer that people provided us. I think that's more or less what I wanted to say. So this is another page I stole from Steve. I think at the back I had prepared something here. Yeah, so probably you're still seeing I think I shared my full screen. So there's a place on the Mobilizing Justice webpage that describes the survey instrument. And you can have access to the questionnaire as well. So that's probably useful. And of course, there's a lot of other elements on this website. So this is what I had to share. I think I can stop sharing. And then we can move to the next part.
Catherine, thank you so much. I really appreciated how your presentation really dug into the rationale that the team used behind each sort of step of designing and implementing the surveys. I found it very thoughtful. Thank you. Okay, so from our audience, this is the time that we would have to welcome questions for Catherine. I would invite any of you who wish to use the raise hand function. That should be somewhere in either the bottom of your screen, or if you're on mobile, it might be on the left in some cases. And otherwise, if you aren't in a position to be able to speak, feel free to add question, or for whatever reason that's your preference, feel free to add questions into the chat, and I will be happy to read them for you. So first, maybe just to start off in terms of recency, from Bruno Santos, we have, yeah, okay.
I
Catherine's
can
reading
read the question.
it. Sure.
I'm sorry. So I'm trying to understand what's the satisfaction levels for the survey. You mean when we asked there was a place when I said when we create a questionnaire and when we're able to, we always include this evaluation of the questionnaire. Was it this question, or it's part of these all these transport justice component dimensions.
Yeah.
Hi.
I have no clue. I have no clue.
Bruno's
We
up.
have to look at the distribution, I guess.
Uh-huh. Hi, I'm Bruno. Thank you for your presentation. My question is related to the level of satisfaction in general, if we have any type of because we have the information that says from 0 to 100%. And
Mhm.
my question is that if we can create any direct connection with the level of satisfaction in a way that, for instance, let's say the person mentioned that 60% and she is satisfied or they are satisfied, and this type of
Yeah. So
information that for us to obtain.
so it was, so for instance, if I take the question, so it's fewer to more or safe
Mm-hmm.
to not safe. So of course, if you're in the middle, so it's 0 is not safe, and then you have very safe to the 100. In the between, it's a
Mm-hmm.
continuous scale. So you'll get, and that's why we need to look into the patterns of answer of a single person. It's like when people score things, sometimes they all in the middle, and we have to compare with respect to the behavior of all the other answers. But I mean, there's no, when you have a discrete scale, you actually force people without knowing whether it's really what they mean. Because I know when you answer a question and you have not safe, a bit safe, safe, very safe. So you force people to actually say I'm safe, but maybe I'm just hmm,
I
it's just
see.
I'm safe, but not fully safe. So it's not.
Mm-hmm.
I would say this kind of perception question is never a precise scale. It's either you force people or you don't. So
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for your question, Bruno. Next, I see a raised hand from Eric Doherty.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can just summarize what you discovered about mobility for lower income seniors from this. I'm quite interested in that almost as a proxy for disability. And particularly, lower income seniors who are non-drivers, and also that interesting question about financial stress, both from housing and transportation, because I'm in British Columbia, and we've got some disturbing new data about homelessness among seniors, and and some of that relates to seniors retaining their vehicle and ending up living in their vehicle.
wow. So I actually don't have an answer because I think currently, so there's been the launch of the data and various people have proposed topic to look into the data. So in my case, I didn't have time to look at the data because we actually waited. So I didn't explain all the process, but the data has been weighted, it's been validated, and now it's out. So actually, this question probably could be answered. And I don't know who's on the line. I wonder if this is one of the topic that was because there was a call. What would you like to answer with this data? So currently, this is what's happening right now. So I have one student who's interested in latent demand and suppressed demand. So this is, but it's for me, I don't have the answer yet because this is not something I had the opportunity to do now. But the list of questions we should address, I think that's something we should capture. So if this is something of interest to you, that's something we should capture and make sure that we're able to understand, to actually report on some of the important questions people have. The element with this data is that since it's across Canada, then we don't have enough observation for a single location, as I was saying, but we're able to. So that's what I'm making right now, the typology of neighborhoods, so we can actually see for people of a certain age living with low income, in a certain area, then we can report on something. But I don't have the answer right now. I don't know if someone else from MJ is there and have looked at these questions, but I didn't do much of analysis because I was so trying to get this data out.
Great, thanks. If anybody from MJ does have clarification on any of the findings that have come out of any analyses so far on low-income seniors, please feel free to chime in. Otherwise, I've made notes, Eric, of the interest in that question, and
Yeah.
I would say for anybody else in the call, if you want to comment in the chat or share your interest in those areas of analysis, this is a good opportunity for us to also capture those, and yeah, we can bring those forward. Yeah. Are there any other folks with questions for Catherine? You can feel free to raise your hand or feel free to put them in the chat and I can read them through. So we have a question from Jeroen. Excuse me if I haven't pronounced that correctly. Were people also asked about social and economic consequences of transport poverty, such as missed job opportunities, missed health appointments, or social isolation because of a lack of transport?
So I will actually go on MJ website because these are questions we tried. I remember, did you miss any appointment? I remember all these. I'm trying to remember whether it was in the last set of questions, but maybe I can show you where you can exactly. You have the full questionnaire, and I'd be really happy if we would get other insight into questions we should try, because we tried a lot. And so you can go through this to see all the questions that were asked. And so we had questions on the frequency of use of the various modes. That's something that we ask. And then we have all these elements. I remember having this question on missed appointment. But I don't remember if it was in the final version. I saw too many versions. I don't recall. We can go through here, but I mean, those who asked, I don't know. Am I sharing my screen? I'm sharing my screen.
Yes.
So the full questionnaire was put on the website actually for people to understand what could be done with this. And there's a lot of questions on this element. So these are a classification question. So this neighborhood, I'm trying to find it rapidly. So I have had to decline employment opportunities because my transportation situation. So this missed commitments or appointment, that's probably something that would be linked to the kind of questions you're asking. So yeah, and then if the mode of transport I use most was suddenly not available, I would still be able to reach my daily activities. So these are things we kept. There was so many questions that so when we had to go through all the potential questions and rank them and ask ways to ask questions as well. So we came up with this version because of the process I explained. And there was this wish also to question about the home location, because it can have an impact on a lot of things. So that's probably the one that would be nearer to what you're questioning. But I invite people to go check the questionnaire, of course.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Yeah, and then I see Eric has provided some context for his interest, which I'm sure is also an interest of certainly other folks in the audience and beyond, about looking more into disability, aging, and transport access and poverty. So another comment in here from Hamadur Rahman. In the impressive work in the US, we don't have any such comprehensive survey on transport poverty. About the affordability dimension measure, I am wondering how the MJ team hypothesized the relationship between the statement owning fewer or more cars and the poverty measure.
Yeah, so the dimensions were part of this this paper I mentioned. So for each of the dimension, we really tried to formulate questions similarly to so for this one on car is about affordability dimensions. So what's the question here?
Yeah, so the question
Okay, yeah.
is, about the hypothesized relationship between owning fewer or more cars and poverty. Like, what
Well,
direction you thought the relationship might be.
so the affordability is one of the dimension. So if you own more car, then you spend more money done. And we also ask about you spend less or more money on transportation. So I'm not sure what's the if you're I'm trying to capture whether people feel forced, because we discuss about suppressed travel, excess travel, forced. This is forced car ownership, because we know in car is the second, well, in Canada, it's the transportation is the second most important expenses of household after housing. And then that's why we included both car and housing in this question of affordability dimension.
Great. Hamador, if you have any follow-up or additional clarifications on your question, do feel free to unmute yourself or raise your hand. Otherwise, if that answered your question, I'll give a moment for any other questions. Okay, I'm hearing a bit of a pause and beat in the other questions. We have probably another 5 minutes for any other questions. Maybe in the meantime, I am happy to share one of my own questions for you, Catherine. So as you saw, quite a bit of our audience is not from academia or research, and I'm sure that a lot of folks who work in this field in municipalities or in other sectors do have some research and survey methods background or training, but that's definitely not a guarantee. And this is a topic that comes up quite a bit in surveys that I've worked with in this field. And it's the topic about weighting. You've talked quite a few times about the importance of weighting the data set. And I think if you wouldn't mind just taking a little bit of a step back and just sort of explaining the logic of why somebody would weight a data set like this and maybe what that means, and maybe just like if you have any words of advice for the benefits of doing this, and maybe in like which context this makes sense to do.
Yeah, so actually when you weight, you try to correct bias from the survey sample, and you make sure that you're able to do statistical inference. So when you would draw a conclusion to the target population. So as I was in the Transport Survey Methods Conference in March, and I said, we know all sample are representative of something, but we need to be able to identify it's representative of what. So if you want to be representative of the Canada population of the CMA, for instance, you need to make sure that your sample will be expanded to reflect this population. And this is really when you want to draw conclusion for this target population. So at first, if the sample was perfect, then you'd have a single weight factor. So it means that all the response behavior are the same, but it's never the case. So when you do a sample, you first should assess what are the factors that are related to what you're trying to explain. So these are your explanatory variable are probably the one you want to control for. And when you want to control for is how you create your sampling frame. So sampling frame will be I need to make sure I have enough observation for a certain area. And I also, in our case, need to make sure I have enough observation for the low income and the rest of the population, what we call our control group in this kind of survey. So this is how we identify the important factors. And when you have this, when you weight, you make sure that you reconstruct population. So based on location, in this case, which is the spatial strata, but you can also have strata which are based on demographic, household structure, income. So when we do and it's also linked to the number of observation, because when you try to fit, then you get issues of concentrated or not distribution of weight factors. But it's really, so you use these weight when you want to make these outcomes representative of the population you target. and you also correct because you have different response behavior. So in typical travel surveys, for instance, and that when I teach this, I also always ask my students, please, can you fill surveys? Because our surveys are totally biased because you don't answer enough. We don't have enough of you young people, male specifically. So that's very funny because and I say, if you don't answer and we don't control for this fact that you have lower response rate, then we'll be just planning routes towards, destinations where you don't go. So it's really about making sure that you have the best representation you can of the target population. When don't you have to wait? Because that's another question we can ask. And there was a discussion on this also at the Transport Survey Methods Conference. When you don't have to wait necessarily, when you do models and you account for all these factors included in the wait process. So it means if I do a model and I use as control variables home location, age, gender, income, then I don't have to wait because it will be within my model formulations. If I can summarize, that's something, but it's really about making sure it represents the full population, because you want to be able at one point to say, well, our survey allow us to assess that elderly people, because the note I took, which live in low-income household in an area less covered by transportation service, or experience poverty based on these dimensions. I don't know if it's a crash course.
Sure, but just a bit of this is just a question that has come up quite a bit with practitioners that I've worked with who might not understand the effects of waiting, or why it's important to do so when looking at data sets. Maybe just
I see the question. I saw the question on the website. Yeah, the assumption is, so we have various questions for all the dimensions. We are testing these ones, but the question of cars is really a limitation factor for travel. And we want to assess whether it's forced car ownership, because to my knowledge, in Canada now, you're considering that a low-income people must have a car, which is a bit a catastrophe because it's still a lot of money spent in this. So I feel that if someone says, I spend more money, I have more car than I would like to, means that they are in experience forced car ownership, so spending more money than they should on ownership. Hopefully it's in line with the answer to the second question, which is about spending money. And it's also a way for us to see whether we create the networks that contribute to reducing car ownership independency.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, and that was a follow-up to Hamador's clarification on on a previous question. Wonderful. Well, we are just about at 1:15. Catherine, thank you so much once again for your presentation and for guiding people to resources where they can find the questionnaire and laying out next steps for the survey. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you'll be using the data.
Yes, and thank you all to the audience members who shared their interest in potential questions to include in the analysis. Feel free to ping our team at any point. There should be contact information on the website as well. Wonderful. So I'm just going to close the session as we always do with a couple of closing Menti questions. I'm going to reshare the Menti link in the chat. You can also just go to menti.com and enter the code 72263558. And while we do that, I'm just going to go over and share my screen so that we can follow along the last Menti questions all together. Here we go. So I see folks are joining in already. So our first question, we ask all of these after every single session. Please feel free to be honest. Your answers are anonymous. I can't backtrack and figure out who you are. So this really helps us to improve future sessions. So first we want to know, did this workshop deepen your understanding of transport equity and justice? So I'll just wait for more of you to join on. Again, if you want to be able to join, the link is in the chat, so you can just click on that, or you can go to menti.com and use the code 7226-3558, and those join instructions are also at the top of my screen. Yeah. So thank you all for sharing so far. I'll give just a few more seconds to make sure that folks can get onto the Menti and take part. Okay, it seems like responses have sort of dropped off. Thanks for sharing. And now we want to ask, did you find the information shared useful or applicable to your work? Okay, thanks so much. Did this workshop format give you the opportunity to share and learn? All right, seems like questions have, answers have stopped coming in. And just in this little bit of time that we have left, please feel free to write any thoughts, suggestions, or concerns you'd like us to know about this session. Our communication lines are always open afterwards, but if you have any immediate suggestions, concerns, thoughts, topics of interest for the analysis, starting off strong with all caps. Thank you, Catherine.
Thank you very
And
much,
thank you,
everyone.
Sophie. All right, just support. Very important topic. Okay. Seems that is what's slowing down. Oh. Yeah, and then very, very interesting in the chat. Okay, well, on that note, yeah, that's all that we have for the session today. I am happy to give you all 12 minutes back of your day. As I have mentioned in the chat earlier, I'm not sure if everybody saw, but we always upload the recordings of these presentations to YouTube, and I will be sharing that with everybody who registered in the session, and it's going to be online for folks to take a look at. But I'll just stop the recording.